This is Saving the Game, a Christian podcast about tabletop role-playing and collaborative storytelling. Recorded Thursday, April 4th of 2018, it's episode 129. In this episode, playing support characters, plus connections outside of our core interests in churches and gaming communities, ending a game early, putting an end to a Moida mystery, lifting up others at the gaming table, and more. Welcome to Saving the Game. I'm Grant.
I'm Peter.
I'm Jenny.
And I'm Tim.
Welcome, Tim.
Thank you.
Normally, I'd, introduce the guest, do the usual thing, but Peter, you invited Tim on.
Yeah, so we've got pastor and friend of the show, Tim Decker, on tonight to talk about support characters with us. So, Tim, why don't you introduce yourself and let our other listeners know about you?
Yeah, I'm excited to be on. I certainly appreciate the invitation. So I'm a lifelong geek. I've been playing role-playing games since probably 1982, so that dates me a little bit.
I was 4.
You were 4, okay.
And I'm the oldest member of the regular hosting team.
I was not born.
I was 8. So.
Nor was I.
So as well as being a lifelong geek and gamer, I also pastor a small church in Owasso, Michigan called Christ Community. And it's really filled with fellow gamers and geeks, and I'm pretty proud of it. So I'm excited to be here.
Oh, very cool.
Very nice.
Yeah, we're glad to have you.
Yeah, we like to get geeky pastors on whenever we can, so...
Oh, yeah.
We've still got 1 or 2 more in our regular group of geeky faith people that we need to lasso and drag on, but we just crossed another one off. We got Tim, so...
Mwahaha. We have you now.
Yep. Yeah. You got it, and you're not getting rid of me, so...
There we go. Okay. Tim, we really do appreciate you coming on. This is promising to be a very good discussion. I'm excited for it. Do you have something you want to kind of plug for our listeners real quick?
Actually, I guess as a plug, I just think I would covet prayers. You know, Christ Community, it's a church plant. We've been going for 6 years, and we're really looking at ways, unique ways to impact the geek community as far as locally. So really, my plug is to covet prayers for us kind of moving ahead and doing some things in a unique way. We live in a smaller community. It's about 14,000 people. So that's kind of my plug, is my church and asking for prayers. We're pretty excited to see what we can do to reach out to the geek community.
Sounds good.
Right.
Just to put you on the spot a little bit, Tim, since you brought this up, what kind of stuff are you doing with your church plant out there?
Well, right now, as far as ministry-wise, kind of one of our strongest ministries right now is actually an anxiety support group. That doesn't have anything to do with geek culture. But
but it's very important.
It is very important, and it's actually coming along really well. As far as to the geek culture, we are looking, at some different ways. The issue that I have in my community is we used to have a local game store that shut down about 3 years ago. So it makes it difficult to not have a central location where you can go and connect at a local level. But we're looking at some different things that we can do, maybe some game nights. I mean, one of the things that I've wanted to do and I'm really praying into and how to go about doing it, there's several churches in this area do blessing of the bikes, where all the bikers in the area can go and they have a church service and get their motorcycles blessed for the start of the riding season. Granted, it's not like you where you live down south where people can ride their motorcycles whenever. Up here, in Michigan, actually, we still have snow on the ground today. So
yeah, we had some here in Illinois. It's not sticking, but it was falling.
We got a good 6 inches of snow yesterday, and we're due to get more tonight. So, yeah.
Fun.
It was a cold day today. It dropped below 70.
Oh, yes.
Oh, no. Oh, my pauvre. Oh, no.
So, anyway, I kind of wanted to do a riff on that and do blessing of the dice. So, I'm really kind of looking at that and how to maybe implement that and do something along those lines. So,
yeah, wasn't there an Episcopalian pastor who was doing that at, I want to say, a Gen Con last year?
Maybe.
Probably.
Maybe. I know a friend of the show, Derek White, did a blessing of the dice at GaryCon this year. I believe I saw him mention online that he did that. So I'm probably going to reach out to him and get some of his ideas. So
Absolutely, yeah.
And yeah, actually, Jenny, I think there was, because there were pictures of him standing there in like his full like clerical collar and everything with the sign, and yeah.
And I looked him up later. Apparently he's closer to High Anglican, I think, just judging from like the decor in his church.
Yeah. I remember
But yeah,
that.
so that's interesting because I know that there are a lot of like, the Anglican Church has so many blessings of things, and it honestly would not surprise me if there had already been like an official blessing of the dice prayer written.
One of the joys of having Jenny on is neither of us are, at all Anglican, and we learn a lot of fascinating things about her denomination having her, because she's a lifelong one. She hasn't switched denominations like I have or been in a different denomination her whole life.
No, I did
Grant
actually
has.
consider it for a short time, but no, I came back to the Anglican Church pretty hard after trying to understand a free-form service, and I was just like, but when's the confession? When do we do this, and when do we do this? And it just didn't make any sense without the structure, so yeah.
The person who's studying library science likes structure.
Library technology.
Library technology. I'll get it right one of these episodes.
Someday.
The library person who does library things.
And likes organizing things for fun, and that likes
has already
structure.
started tagging some of our blog posts, which I really appreciate, by the way. So
no problem. It's fun. It's a fun little project for me to do. I'm having fun with it.
I'm glad you find it so. I truly am.
It's satisfying. It's like those videos of people like cutting foam blocks with hot knives and stuff. It's just really satisfying.
I just saw an article online. You're talking organization here. It was a study that said highly intelligent people like a mess. I've tried convincing my wife that I'm highly intelligent, and she's just not bought it. So.
I actually use the excuse of I don't like to mix my work life and my home life, so my home is just a terrible disaster, and
There you go.
and there we go.
That's reasonable.
Well, Grant, you've got some gaming news, don't you?
Just a little bit. I've talked before about my fellowship game. We had a session of that last night, which was more of the GM having a frank discussion about how he wasn't enjoying it anymore, and the rest of us agreeing with him. So we have
kind of a
shut
bummer.
that down. It's a bummer, but also remember this was the GM's first attempt to GM anything.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Okay. That's
It lasted
fair.
several months. We had wonderful character moments that we are all extremely fond of, like, hey guys, you know how we can defend this city from the invading army? Let's burn it down ourselves so that we all agree we have nothing to fall back on. And we convinced the whole population that was an awesome, ballsy idea.
Oh wow. That's
We did this in a bar.
Isn't that where every idea like that starts?
Exactly. That was actually the whole point. Because we were all very drunk, and all the halflings were drunk, and they were like, this sounds awesome.
The invading army was like, what are you?
In fairness, also
Screw
the
it, we're
invading
going
army
home
was
now.
led by Jadis the Ice Queen, so, fire. Big old torch to throw in her face.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
We had cool moments like that, and none of us were at all disappointed with the game, which I think is very telling. But it had gotten unmanageable because Fellowship is designed for a maximum of 5 players, and we were doing 7 plus a GM.
Oh boy.
Okay.
A brand new GM too.
Yeah, and it has some structural problems as well. Also, our group doesn't do epic campaigns with having an epic campaign in mind.
Yeah, you do them as having a 2-session prequel to the epic campaign in mind.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Like, our epic campaigns are lots of small moments that add up to a long story that goes some very remarkable places. But when we looked at a game and said, let's try and make this a big, epic, Tolkien-esque adventure, that's where we started struggling. Because all the moments we enjoyed were the small character moments, and all the big stuff was just boring and felt disconnected from everything we wanted to do.
That
And
almost just sounds like good general advice, because a lot of the stuff that's been the best in our D&D game has been those little character moments and stuff.
Well, I think it would work for some people, right? And if we had a smaller group, it would be fine. But the GM was just, like, getting physically ill thinking about the game and prepping for it.
Wow.
And had some rough times anyway. We were just like, no, we've done enough. It was really good. We can stop it here.
Yeah.
We're all very happy with this. We love those moments, but we're not going to miss it.
Yeah.
It was fun, but now it's done.
Also, brand new GM. You should be proud that you did that well.
Yeah, exactly. To be clear, by the way, for those of you who don't listen or haven't heard our backlog, when I say we take games and stretch them out, this group that I was doing Fellowship with, we wanted to do a 6-week prequel for a vampire game, so the GM did a mage game. It was going to go, 6 weeks, maybe 3 months, if things really got stretched out. 2.5 years later, we wrapped up that game.
Oh.
And that group started the vampire game, which was supposed to go, a year, and is 6 years in and going.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, that's how
a 2.5 year prequel.
Yeah.
And it's also worth noting that mage game was excellent, and you talk about it to this day.
Yeah. There are parts of that mage game I still haven't talked about, like when we did a musical cabaret.
You can't just drop that on us.
I'm gonna.
Save it for a future music topic.
Yeah, no, I've been wanting to save that for talking about music at some point. But anyway, I do think ending a campaign early and ending it well might be a topic to come back to. So I don't want to get too into everything, but we've ended that. We're going to be doing some other stuff. Someone else is GMing for the first time, which is exciting.
Oh, nice.
And she is running Headspace, which looks really interesting.
Never even heard of that one. What's the premise there?
I've heard the title.
Here's the premise. It's a cyberpunk game.
Okay.
Imagine Shadowrun, but where you are mentally connected to everyone else.
That's right. I have heard of this, and I've been wanting to check it out.
And here's the cool part about that. Your skills always succeed. When you need to do something that you do not have a skill in, if someone else has that skill, you can use it. But the emotional baggage tied to that skill comes with the knowledge of that skill.
Oh.
Oh, boy.
Ooh.
It's very psychological. People have run Headspace campaigns where the characters were not even physically in the same city as any other character.
Wow.
And doing like a Shadowrun style mission literally all over the world all at once. But because the characters are mentally connected in this way, it doesn't really matter where the characters are because they all exist in each other's heads without any emotional or mental defenses whatsoever.
Grant, have you ever watched Sense8?
I have heard it is very close to Sense8. I have not watched it.
I would recommend watching a little bit of Sense8, specifically just parts of the first season, because what you're talking about with like heists and people being in each other's heads, that gets explored a lot in that show.
Yeah, no, I think Sense8 was probably somewhat involved in this game's creation.
Yeah.
By the sound of it, or at least both of them were drawing from the same inspirations.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm excited about that. The other thing we have decided to do is do some round robin GMing, and also specifically say we don't care how far we get in the game. After X sessions, we're stopping.
Interesting.
Well, we all have stuff we want to try and run. Now, the other cool part is that Chrissy may end up running a couple of games.
Ooh.
All right. And she's been wanting to for a while, hasn't she?
Yes, she has. And so she's looking at a couple of things that she might want to run. She's been wanting to run World of Darkness Innocence for a long time since she played it at Fear the Con 5.
I was in that game with her. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the few World of Darkness books I have on my shelf. Monster House, the game, just seems amazing to me. So
I think this is a good thing. And we ended, again, I don't want to get into this more than we already have, but we ended this game in a very positive way that I think set us up very well for future success, which is why I want to talk about it in its own episode later.
Yeah.
Jenny?
Yeah. So the Moida mystery got solved and we unmurdered the guy. Because apparently getting turned to stone is not exactly a death sentence. So,
why, that's barely Moida at all.
Barely Moida at all. Yeah, so we found the lady who was breeding cockatrices and basilisks and all sorts of terrible monsters. We found out that the local Castellan had hired her to breed him a basilisk so that he could upend all sorts of hierarchies and so that he could get land that he felt was rightfully his. And we arrested that man and locked him away and had a rollicking good time. And this coming Monday, we should be continuing with the same characters, which I was actually not expecting, because this game was sort of a prequel to Keep on the Borderlands, which is a very old, well-known, I think it's 2nd edition module.
I think that's one of the first edition modules.
Okay, we've got so many old D&D books in this house. It's just, there's a lot. Hard to keep track of. But yeah, so we were going to sort of make this into a generational game in a way, and we were going to then take these characters and then basically transfer a bunch of stats to other characters that we were going to say were these characters' descendants, and then play Keep on the Borderlands. Because this was sort of set when the keep is being built, and the Castellan was in charge of making sure the keep got built on time and on schedule. But then nefarious things happened, and there were certain legal consequences, and yeah, so we'll be keeping on continuing with these same characters in another thing that Mum has planned, and it's very exciting.
Wow.
Cool.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Our D&D game hasn't happened for a while. And then I guess I'll go ahead and talk this up a little bit. I'm in the process of starting the first game with the setting that I've been designing with Grant, Jenny, Chrissy, and our intentionally anonymous player from Grant and I's gaming group. We're going to probably be doing that at some point in the not too distant future. We're starting to swat character ideas around, so there may be some more gaming news coming in future episodes.
Nice.
I'm looking forward to it, starting the process of making characters.
Yep.
So you said that's a setting that you guys have worked on together?
No,
it's the one that I've
Peter.
been writing about in the blog.
Okay.
We'll put a link to the series of setting design posts in the show notes. I am, as of this recording, up to 16 parts of it. I think it'll be 17 unless I have something else to blog about this next Tuesday.
That's quite a series.
By the time this episode drops. Yeah, and I'm still very much going at it. Should we move on to our Patreon question here, or do we have any other news that we want to cover?
No, let's move on. We've talked about various other things, and I do want to let Tim get a word in edgewise.
Yeah, that would probably be good.
No problem.
We're going to go ahead and roll on our table of Patreon backer questions that patrons send in to us. Here we go. Okay, so this is from Composer Dad. Something I like about church communities is that they encourage unlikely connections between people that may not normally interact. There's this common interest outside of the usual career/kids/sports connection. So artists end up being friends with taxi drivers, truck drivers with soccer moms, etc. Do you see a similarity with RPG communities, these kinds of surprising connections? Okay, it's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That is a good question.
TLDR, yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to say yes and no here. Continue.
Okay, well, why don't you go ahead and get into that?
How about you guys go, because it's going to take me a while to verbalize this properly.
No, that's fair. You know, I'm going to change my answer slightly as well, because I think yes and no is probably correct. Healthy RPG communities, I think, do have that. And this is also true of churches, I think. When you have a community that isn't diverse, it can quickly become unhealthy. I don't want to use toxic, but I think it can become so limited in focus that it stops looking at the larger picture and loses its real sense of purpose. This is one reason that, for example, we are all very fond of the Fear the Boot community, because there were a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds who all liked RPGs, but were not all 3.5 D&D players. There was a massive variety of RPGs and lots of perspectives that they brought to it. And I think a healthy church functions the same way. Lots of different people bringing lots of perspectives, but all in service of something greater, namely being part of the body of Christ. Where you start getting churches that focus very heavily on externalities or demanding uniformity. I'm going to harken back here to our conversation with Ed Healy, unity versus uniformity.
Yeah.
I think where you start getting a church or any community that demands that everything be exactly the same based on some subset of people's preferences or ideals of what the right sort is, I think it starts to get very sick. And that's true of RPG communities. There are spaces for people who specialize in things, but building an entire community out of that can be problematic.
Yeah. My yes and no is sort of similar to that. I think for me, the main difference is that within RPG communities, we don't talk about the outside interests very much, because we are usually there to talk about RPGs or board games or closely related things. But when I go to a church community, we talk about all sorts of other things. So while yes, you are definitely in both communities interacting with taxi drivers, artists, soccer moms, truck drivers, I find that I talk about my non-RPG-ness less within RPG communities than I do at church, where there is a lot more crossover in my conversations with people about my various outside interests. And that's just based on my personal experience.
Do you think maybe that's the result of kind of the hyper-specialization of different conversation spaces, especially on the internet? Like, this is a Facebook group for the discussion of role-playing games and nothing else.
I think it is partly that, because I also don't really have that much of a role-playing game community in my area, like in real life. And if I were talking with more people in real life around the subject of RPGs, I likely would stray off that. But when I go to conventions, I'm there for like 2-3 days, and I am there to game. And yeah, I might talk about my outside life a little, but I am there for the purpose of gaming. And it is that hyper-specialization of subjects.
I think maybe you guys are hinting at where I come down, because I do think that it does have to do with the gaming community, that hyper-specialization, and how typically, for example, you're getting together with fellow gamers for what purpose? Well, to game, and so it's Saturday night. That's your campaign, that's your gaming session. So the conversation, I think, by and large, is going to be focused around that. And also, again, online, where's those conversations happen? Well, Facebook groups, whether you're in a OSR Facebook group and having conversations there, or 5th edition, or, whatever. So the whole purpose with that is specifically for gaming. Now, the game store that I had mentioned that used to be in our town was a great little store called Game Nights. And Friday night, now this was during the dreaded 4th edition period of D&D, which is actually when I came back into playing D&D after a hiatus for a few years.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and there were some things I loved about 4th edition, and there were some things that I particularly didn't care for. But the one thing it did do, at that time, my wife and I, our kids were teens, so they were finally just getting to that age where we had some freedom. And so we actually found ourselves going to this game store on Friday nights to game. And there was a group. They would have open gaming. Whoever wanted to come and play in this 4th edition gaming session / campaign was welcome. And it was through there that my wife and I made the connection with who her and I would say are some of our best friends right now. I kind of almost say, to answer his question, yes, actually, I do think that in some ways it can serve the same, not the same function, but a similar function, because it's about community, right? It can be about community. And at least from my perspective, and this is how I view it as a Christian gaming, is I see that as an opportunity to bridge and build relationships with people who maybe the common interest isn't Christianity, right? But there is a common interest, and you're able to bridge that gap and find some commonalities in other areas. And this couple, they do not attend church. They're not involved in church, but they are certainly our best friends. One of our best friends. They continue to be in our gaming group, though that's been kind of on a hiatus due to some health situations with this friend of ours, her mother, and my wife had some surgery. But just thinking back to that game store, it became almost like a community. And it was an opportunity to share life with people on a Friday night over this common goal of gaming. And, we just really, as we sat around playing, and for those of you who did play 4th edition, you'll remember a round of combat could take an hour and a half. So an hour, once you got up at a higher level. So there was time for actually conversation while people were taking their turns and just building relationships. So it's not the same as church, because at church, what's our focus? Church is about coming around together, goal of worshiping Christ, deepening our faith, supporting one another. Iron sharpens iron. The scripture tells us to not forsake the assembling together, as is the habit of some. And the goal is for us to come together and encourage one another, right? That's why we should be coming together as a church family. But I do think there's some similarities. And I I'm kind of passionate about gaming being that avenue to build relationships with people that maybe that's your commonality, and then you learn about life with one another and build relationships that are lifelong. And without gaming, this couple would not be our friends to this day. And they are certainly cherished and treasured friends. And I thank 4th edition D&D for that. So if there's any positive that came from 4th edition D&D, it's this friendship that my wife and I have with this couple. So
I also feel I should state, like, I'm not saying that, like, my individual RPG groups that I've been in have not been incredibly diverse, because they have. It's just like, when talking about a larger community, like a gaming store or like some sort of gathering spot for gamers, I personally have less of the experience of talking about the outside interests.
So it's going to be hard to say anything that you guys haven't already, but the one thing that I think bears some emphasizing is a lot of the time, like you guys were talking about the hyper specialization of internet communities earlier on, right? You know, we come here to talk about gaming. That stays true up to a point until you actually start becoming friends with some of those people.
Correct.
Like, you know, Grant, Jenny, and I all know each other through the Fear the Boot community. And the forums there have some fairly strict rules about what you can't talk about, specifically politics and religion. Well, when everybody kind of moved off of the forums there and onto Facebook, we were all kind of already friends with each other. And what did we want to talk about? What we weren't able to talk about. And that led to finding out we had made friends with people that were totally different from us and being like, hey, this is kind of valuable. You know, it's like, I don't know that if we had led with some of these points of difference that we would have ever given each other the time of day, but we have years of talking about this shared interest and, you know, learning what this person's personality is like and learning what this person's essence is. You know, it's like, I might not agree with this person's views about, you know, the nature of, you know, politics or religion, but I know that this is a kind person or a thoughtful person or a trustworthy person even. And so that can kind of, having that basis of built up this friendship around a common interest can kind of function as a bridge across some of the more turbulent waters of controversial topics and stuff and let you engage with people that, maybe you wouldn't have the courage to do before. I mean, the one example that I'm kind of inclined to use is the editor for the Sojourn anthologies that I was in, Norse Pagan. She has very different religious beliefs from me. She's a very different person from me in a lot of ways. I really value my friendship with her. I think she's a fantastic person. I've learned a lot of stuff from her. I've come to appreciate a lot of things that I would have never even been exposed to because of her influence in my life. I think knowing her and her husband and her husband's brother kind of by extension through social media has been incredibly valuable to me. And I would have never met any of those people if it hadn't been for the shared interest in gaming, kind of like you and your friends, Tim. So I think it can just wind up being a surface thing. And I think if you're part of like a large community, like that massive 5e group on Facebook that I think we're all part of, there's a few posters in there that I'm starting to recognize, but there's 100,000 plus people in that group. Right. I don't know all of those people. But I know the people from Fear the Boot.
I remember when it was like 1,000.
Yeah. I wasn't in that early. I think I came in around 87,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's your incredibly involved answer, Composer Dad.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a good question.
Yeah. Did you have something else you wanted to toss in, Tim?
Well, no, I was thinking about what Grant was saying. I believe it was Grant about the how there can be some dysfunction in church and in gaming community. A couple of days ago for work, I had to be up in a town called Saginaw, and I just happened to be going by a store. It's a gaming store. I had never heard of it. I thought, well, I'm going to stop in and stop in and see what it's about. And it's kind of an interesting store because they sell a lot of Xbox and PS4, and they had even like original NES games but then they also had a huge board game section, and then they had a pretty good sized RPG section. Of course, 5th edition was kind of the feature there. But talking to the guy, we were talking about the move from like 3rd edition 3.5 to 4th, and then into 5th, and we were kind of having this conversation along those lines. He says, what's interesting about the gaming community, he said, we're kind of excluded from the rest of culture sometimes, right? He says, we're kind of the subculture. People look down on us. We're not accepted. And he said, so you would think that we could be the most accepting group of people, right? And he says, sometimes I found it's almost the opposite. He said, there's so much sometimes gatekeeping, like, hey, I'm a 3.5 or I'm a Pathfinder player. And I was thinking about that and how I think we as the gaming community need to really kind of measure ourselves with that and make sure, hey, are we being inclusive? Are we being accepting? And he talked about that a lot, about inclusivity and how he was the manager for the store and how he supports like everything. He had Pathfinder stuff, he had other RPGs, and he was very passionate about it. And actually, when I was leaving there after this conversation, I thought, what he's describing is what the church should be. The church should be an inclusive, loving community that certainly we have the Word of God. There's certain things in the Word of God that bring us together, right? But as a church, as the capital C church, we should function in the way he was talking about, how we set aside those differences, how, you know, the Methodist Church, I know baptism is you get sprinkled with water. The denomination I'm a part of, it's full immersion. Does that matter? No, that's just kind of a small thing. You know, we come together around the common core of believing that Christ is our Savior and that he's died to give us new life. We're past Easter, where we celebrate the resurrection, which talks about us being resurrected with Christ into a new life. So when he was talking about that, it resonated with me as a Christian. I thought, that's the passion that we as a church should have too. So I guess that's kind of my little mini sermon, I guess. So I apologize for about going on a tangent there, but Grant had mentioned that, and I started thinking about this conversation I had with this store manager here at this game store and how passionate he was about being inclusive and bringing people together in community. And I thought, well, that's what the church needs to do. That's what the church should be.
Yeah.
You could almost say that the church needs to be supportive.
Mm-hmm.
Segue.
That was an aggressive segue,
yes.
Jenny. I do want to throw one other thing there that Tim has said, because I've had this thought for a while, but it never really came up on the podcast. I think all the different denominations that the church has split into over the years can be kind of like all the different editions of whatever your favorite RPG is. You can look at it as those people playing that other edition are bad and they shouldn't, be doing that. Or you can look at it and say, hey, because this other edition exists, more people are playing games overall. That's amazing.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yep. I was very much the former when I was younger, and now it's like, I look around and I see like Lutherans and Baptists and Catholics and stuff, and it's like, yeah, it's really fantastic that they all exist, because there's people that probably wouldn't feel comfortable in my Methodist church that are still going. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Composer Dan, thank you for an excellent question. Really appreciate it. Obviously, we had a lot to say on that one.
Yeah, that was a hard discussion about the Patreon question this time. Yeah.
All right. Well, the good news is we have a topic that should be relatively quick, I think. So let's go ahead and get to it. But first, if you want to get your own question in, just support us on Patreon, patreon.com/savingthegame. Check that out. Let's go through our scripture here and then get into our topic, which, as Jenny so punnily suggested, is about support characters. So who wants to take this bit of Exodus?
I will. So Exodus 17, 8 through 13. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I'll stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands." So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with a sword.
Hebrews chapter 13, verses 15 through 16. Through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that openly profess his name. And do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifices God is pleased.
This is Luke 10, 36 to 37. These are the last two verses of the parable of the Good Samaritan. Which of these do you think was the neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise."
So our topic tonight is support characters, clerics, and such like. And this one is a topic that we probably could have started in on at any point in our recording history here, because this is one of those complaints that we have heard for a very long time, ever since we started playing, I think. And we wanted to go ahead and address it here because, I don't know about you, but I'm tired of hearing it.
Yeah, I'm real tired of hearing it, actually. Cleric is my favorite class, so let's get into this.
Yeah, so Peter, you and I saw, and probably all of us saw, a thread in a particular Facebook group dedicated to D&D 5th edition, I believe it was. Was it
actually,
the 5th
this was in just kind of a general, smaller community.
I was thinking of a different one.
Yeah,
okay.
The owner kind of posted, I've seen a lot of complaints about playing support classes and stuff. I would love to hear anybody's thoughts about this.
Yeah, and let's be clear, everybody knows the trope, nobody wants to play the cleric.
Right.
Yeah.
It's even worked its way into Overwatch, for heaven's sake.
It really has, and we're going to be talking about Overwatch a lot, probably, and other games with teams and support roles and things like that, but certainly I don't want to play the cleric, nobody wants to play the cleric. Can we just have an NPC cleric and healer so that nobody has to do anything boring? I think we've all heard that complaint.
Right.
Peter,
Yep.
I think you wanted to go off.
The very first actual tabletop D&D character that I ever played, I'd played some GURPS before, but the first time I sat down to play D&D, I played a cleric. And over the years, I have played clerics more than probably any three other, actually probably more than all other 11 classes put together. I have played a lot of clerics. I like the class quite a bit. And I think one of the big problems is a lot of the time, people sit down and they want to play somebody who is edgy and tough and too cool for school, and that doesn't work as a cleric, or at least not in my opinion. I think the
you've actually given me a very good idea, though, Peter.
I think the key to really kind of enjoying the role is to kind of embrace it in a way and play somebody who actually cares, because you are loaded up with all of these ways to help people. So the absolute worst case scenario is that you function as an amplifier and a suit of armor for everybody else. That first cleric player character that I ever played in D&D, there was a time when we introduced a new character into the game, and because of the way that this particular game worked, you always came in at first level. So the D&D had this first level character in. He'd come in as an NPC and he'd given him some XP, and then he'd leveled up once kind of out of the game. So he was level 2. And my 8th level cleric was able to buff him up to the point where he could keep up with the rest of the party, who was also like 6th to 8th level. That I had to is another topic, but it was pretty cool to be able to do that. The thing that's made things the most, and we're going to get into this when we talk about kind of the GMing side of this, is that if all you're ever doing is fighting stuff, it will get stale, just putting people's hit points back on and casting buff spells and stuff. So the trick is to either get a GM like Grant, who's going to do this automatically because it's good story, or ask the GM to give you opportunities to do other things, because the cleric player or character that I have now, Lambert, is a person who can just walk up and push the stop button on somebody suffering. You get all of these healing spells and stuff so you can stop bleeding and poison and disease, and you can like take curses off of people and all of this other stuff. One of the more emotionally affecting moments that I had in the game was a few sessions back. We walked into this fort. The colony started out with 2 different ships. One that we'd been on had landed on a relatively nice island and things were going pretty well. The other one had wound up in this desperate kind of perpetual siege situation. People were starving. I was able to walk in there and feed like 60 people. I blew through my 3rd level spells for the day, but I fed 60 people who were starving.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was actually, I get a little bit choked up telling the story or like writing the post about it, because it's like you can just imagine this horrible, desperate situation and just walking in and being like, nope, you all eat today.
Yeah, that's cool.
The other thing that I mentioned in the post, one of the things that makes it so rewarding to play a healer or a cleric or another one of these types of support characters that actually cares, is that your abilities feed directly into your priorities and vice versa. So I think as adults, we've all had that horrible experience of watching somebody that we care about get hurt, or visiting somebody who's really sick in the hospital and just getting that awful sick feeling where you wish you could do something, but you can't. The power fantasy of a cleric or another healer type is you can do something in that situation. You can do something meaningful. You can give that person their life back. That is amazing. And this concludes my rant about why clerics are good, but it's just, it's one of those things where it's like, why is this scene as boring? I mean, in our last episode, okay, I guess the rant isn't quite over. In our last episode, we were talking about saints, and it's like healing miracles are one of the most common things that qualifies people for sainthood. Why is this looked at as this dull pedestrian thing?
So I think it's a couple of things. First, in purely tactical dungeon crawl games, you don't have those opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's fair. So don't play a purely tactical dungeon crawl.
Hold on. If your sole interaction is making sure other people have cool moments, at least as far as you perceive it, you may run into issues where that eventually starts to feel like you're never getting spotlight time.
Yeah, you start to feel kind of left out.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of it. I think it is a combination of people who play a cleric or other support character not knowing how to give that character spotlight time, and GMs not knowing how to create that spotlight time for them.
Yeah.
But also it's, I think, a stereotype of the character archetype not being interesting or important.
I think that's part of it. I also know that there is a huge amount of resentment, both in video games and in RPGs. The healers become resentful because they're seen as, the animated rolling cart of healing potions. The fighter looks at a dragon, says, the healer will heal me, and charges full on like Leroy Jenkins. And the healer is reduced in the party's eyes so frequently to this animated cart of healing potions. Like in Overwatch, you see the Genji rush in saying, but the Mercy will heal me when the Mercy's halfway across the map, and then gets angry at the Mercy for not healing him when she's halfway across the map from him. So
she's like, my move speed is a fraction of yours.
Well, the other thing is, and this is true in like League of Legends and plenty of other games as well, Genji is a character who has to dive in on top of people. Mercy is a short-range healer, basically, and has a movement ability that will let them sort of keep up. I'm going to take this fragile healer archetype and dive in and hope she follows me into a crowd of 6 people when there's no other support. And it's like, if she does, you've gotten both of you killed, and you're going to blame the healer for dying.
Mm-hmm.
And if the healer stays back, you're going to blame the healer for not following you in.
Yeah.
Because it's not your fault. Clearly.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, probably one reason people don't like playing healer archetypes and support characters is because if you have been reduced to a heal bot, you're just getting blamed when you cannot provide sufficient healing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one way around that, of course, is making your support character do more than interact only with the other members of the party. And I think this is something that clerics in particular have done for a very long time, but it's been largely ignored. And you see this again in like Overwatch and League of Legends, which are the two esports kind of stuff that I follow pretty closely, but in plenty of other team-based games. My favorite healer character in Overwatch, for example, is Zenyatta, who has a healing ability. He's got one basic ability that heals somebody over time. Great. He's got another one that makes enemies take more damage. Okay, so now we're helping other people. We're supporting by making other people have cool moments, but also you're doing it not by interacting with your team, but by interacting with the enemy team. You're debuffing instead of just buffing. Also, Zenyatta can do a surprising amount of damage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hold down that right click, charge up, and let fly a volley of orbs right at somebody's head. In professional Overwatch play, there are a lot of Zenyatas who get kills because they just kind of go, and shoop, right click, I just sniped someone. Zenyatta's ultimate is one of the most powerful ultimates in the game in that he becomes invincible and provides massive AoE healing to all of his team, basically creating a zone of nothing dies around me, which feels really good. There's a reason in professional Overwatch play, support ultimates are the most important, and DPS ultimates are among the least important. which I think is telling because that means it's a well-designed game where playing supports is fun and interesting. Mm-hmm. League of Legends, I know, had a very long period of time early in its history where nobody wanted to play support. And at low levels, nobody really wants to play support because they want to be the guy with the high kill score and looking awesome. And don't get me wrong, that's a fun power fantasy. But skilled support play is so highly valued that at higher levels of play, supports are highly sought after, and people want to play support because they recognize how much power that has. Plus, Riot's done a good job of creating interesting and interactive supports who support in lots of interesting ways and have lots of interesting playstyles. One of their most recent supports has basically an assassin playstyle. They dive in, do assassin-y movements and dashing around and that sort of thing, and then come back. But it's like knock-ups and healing when you come back and things like that, rather than hop in, do a bunch of damage, and get out.
My favorite character to play in Overwatch is Orisa because she gets that shield that she can drop. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of the time, I mean, I'm not all that lethal of an Overwatch player, but boy, howdy, can I help keep the rest of my team alive? It's like that shield is amazing.
It's a similar thing with Zarya for me, because I'm a Zarya main, pretty heavy Zarya main, and one of my favorite things is getting that lifesaver play of the game where at the last second I deploy a shield on somebody and I'm like, not today. Not right now.
Well, I guess kind of the thought I'm having right now as we're talking is I think part of the issue with the support character is a narrative issue, right? And yes. This is, I guess, kind of moving towards the kind of the GMing side a little bit. Part of it is, for example, and I've been thinking about the setting of Ravenloft, which is probably one of my favorite, the Gothic horror with Count Strahd. And in a setting like that, right, the cleric is not going to take a back seat to anybody.
Oh, no.
Not at all. And so I think part of it too is it's a narrative issue, and it's a kind of a adventure design issue for the GM, or a session design issue for the GM, where it's very important that the dungeon master, the game master, whatever system you're playing, kind of thinks about the party as a whole. And I would do this when I had time. I typically run kind of preset adventures now just because I don't have time. But when I would have some time to design my adventures, I'd think of the group as a whole, and I would try to find things and put things in place with each character that they could shine. And to me, there's one of the greatest moments is when the cleric actually brings the party back from the very edge of death. Everybody's down. The dragon's going to breathe fire and destroy them all, and the cleric is able to turn the tide of the battle. The same thing in like a Gothic horror, Turn on Dead. That was always, as a teen, I loved playing. We ran through that I-9 Ravenloft adventure several times, and I love playing a cleric because there's nothing more fun to me than turning on dead. So I think a lot of it has to do with just the narrative that's presented and developed in the game session.
Yeah. I'm also wondering if a lot of it couldn't also be helped with a detailed backstory and personality that you can role play with. It is a lot harder to see the cleric as the animated cart of healing potions if that animated cart of healing potions had a really great discussion with you around the campfire last night. So if you allow for your players to have those good roleplay moments, and if your characters want to do those great roleplay moments, latch on to that, because it is going to make your cleric a lot harder to not ignore, but ignore. It's going to make their personality hard to ignore, and it's going to humanize them a fair amount.
I think one of the things that makes Lambert so rewarding to play is that he's kind of got to be the moral compass of this group. Because he's neutral good, and the other two characters are chaotic neutral and will just kind of look out for their own self-interest without him around. But because the three of them have been together for so long, they've built up these bonds of trust and friendship, and they care about each other, and they look out for each other, and that kind of stops Lambert from being seen as a bag of hit points by the other two PCs. Some of it is we have some good group members, and there's no substitute for that, but the difference in backstory and actual personalities for the characters is amazing. And yes, standing the two of them up when they both got knocked down to 0 hit points by a banshee did feel pretty awesome, even if we were terrified at the time.
Right.
One thing our group does fairly well, simply because it's a small group, we sometimes have some people helping more with procedural progress, developing the story procedurally, making things happen, while other people are contributing dramatically. And as a result, even though maybe one person's turn to shine mechanically, the dramatic interest is on someone else. Yeah, that's a great opportunity for your support character, who maybe isn't the one heaving the giant stone out of the way and doing cool things in the dungeon crawl or whatever. They can contribute at a more dramatic level. Fair warning, I have not seen much of Firefly and didn't particularly like most of what I watched. But what's the Reverend
Shepherd Book?
Shepherd Book, yeah.
Yeah, Shepherd Book. From what I've seen, he's got some moments where he gets to shine procedurally, but he's always the guy everybody comes to sort of bounce dramatic conversations off of and build character off of. And that's a great role for a support character because he's important without being the guy flying the ship in cool ways or being the guy firing the guns.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I feel it's also important to note that this dramatic mover, as it were, doesn't necessarily have to be the healer all the time, and instead can be somewhat like the face in Shadowrun, or can be a bard.
Yeah.
And I think saddling the cleric with the narrative side of things could be a little overwhelming for them a lot of the time. I mean, depending on the player, obviously, but
yeah. No, you're right. One thing that has worked out in our group is making, just because, again, by virtue of the fact we have a small number of characters, but Peter, your cleric is also probably the character with the most knowledge skills in our group.
Oh, yeah.
Not the highest intelligence, but the most knowledge skills, which means you're the guy that we go to for a lot of knowledge about the world, especially since you've got knowledge nature in an exploration game and knowledge religion when we're dealing with ghosts and demons and other fun things.
Yeah, and also he's got the survival skill, which is unique among the party because he came from a nature-oriented monastic order. So
right.
A lot of the stuff that's made him important is hey, that plant's edible and that one will disinfect wounds. It's it's not, I can crush you with my hammer. He's moderately good at that, but allowing civilization to actually exist, that's what he's really good at.
Sure.
And that's where from the game master side of things, kind of going back to my point, what Peter was just talking about, and Grant, you brought it up about his skill set, right? And that's why it's important you look at the skill set, because you're able then to develop some opportunities for Peter's character to shine by driving the narrative to a point where the party has to rely on him, in certain instances. I think that's why whenever I would run a game session, I would always try to do something where everybody is included, where everybody's going to have an opportunity for their character to shine. And I really think that that's kind of a key for the gaming community to move beyond this cliche of the cleric is just kind of, as I love how Jenny described it, this card of this card of healing potions going down the aisle, as the fighter needs them because he's just ran into the breath weapon of the dragon, and burnt to a crisp. That's really a key is trying to do things that drive that narrative and draw the support characters into the spotlight from time to time. My wife, back when we were playing 4th edition, in 5th, I haven't delved into the cleric that much to really know if this is still the case in 5th. But in 4th edition, they had the pacifist cleric. And that thing did just massive amounts of healing. I mean, it was just phenomenal. It sounds kind of boring, right? But it's actually really cool and kind of puts that person in the spotlight because here they are in combat, refusing to enter into combat, because they're going to be back there supporting and buffering, their friends against the foe. And so in a way, it seems counterintuitive, but in a way that actually would put my wife's character, that pacifist cleric, in the spotlight because she was doing things opposite of what everyone else was, and attention was drawn to her. So
Well, you're basically playing Desmond Doss at that point. That guy who went into World War II without a rifle and saved all those people.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you there, but it's like...
Nope. And Desmond Doss, that's a perfect example of really what the pacifist cleric was like. And so I just think a lot of it really has to do with, somebody brought up in this conversation the dungeon crawl. And if that's really, and there's nothing wrong with that. Hey, if that's how, and there's times where we get together and we just want to do a dungeon crawl. We'll do a one shot and you're just crawling through the dungeon and, fighting monsters. And
those are fun, just not to the exclusion of everything else.
Absolutely fun. But that's not an opportunity to make the cleric shine other than relegating it to, like Jenny said, the carrier of the healing potions. But in a campaign setting, if the game master is good at what he does, and it sounds like Grant is. I loved when I read this example of what Peter had shared. I just thought, well, Grant is truly a good game master because he provided opportunity. So the story of feeding 60-some people, bringing them from the brink of starvation, that's a great story. That's something that you're going to tell for years to come. That's something that your characters in game will talk about from time to time and remember. So that was an opportunity that was developed to actually allow the cleric as a support character to shine and be in the spotlight for that moment.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to be a good GM when you have proactive players as well.
True.
Just to be clear, because all I did was say, so here's a miserable place. I'm pretty sure you guys will want to fix that. Yeah, I didn't have to plan much beyond that.
Yeah, and we all kind of put our heads together and we were like, okay, so this is a miserable place, so how do we make it not a miserable place?
Right.
You're working on it.
Yeah, we're working really hard on it. We've encountered some setbacks, but it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah,
maybe.
I mean, sure, you're currently trapped in somebody's nightmarish dream of their past with a giant evil tree in the middle of it, but that's okay.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll buff right out. So one other thing.
Wait. It'll buff right out.
Like a scratch in car paint. It'll be fine.
Well, like a support character?
Like a support character buffs you.
I didn't even. I accidentally.
Are you just instinctively punning? Is that what this is?
Maybe.
It must be.
Now, to be fair, I didn't say that one. Peter said that one. I just turned it into a pun for him.
Yeah, I just had to call it out because he didn't realize what he had done. That's amazing.
I'm a monster. I don't even realize my evil anymore. One other thing that I want to touch on before we take off here, because we've been focusing very much on traditional D&D fantasy style games, is this can sometimes be a little bit of a problem in other game types too, right? You've got the modern game where somebody plays like the wheelman and everybody just looks at him as a taxi service, or you've got a hacker and people are like, you're just an electronic set of lockpicks. You can't really do anything. Okay, first of all, if that's what's happening, as the GM, do yourself a favor, watch a few seasons of Leverage, and watch the great Robert De Niro, Jean Reno movie Ronin from back in the day. I guarantee you will A, have a very good time and enjoy yourself immensely, and B, come away with a stack of ideas that comes up to roughly eye level or so that you can use to help those support characters be awesome.
Right. Mm-hmm. Or if you want to see a good example of a wheelman and how they can take center stage, go rent or watch Baby Driver.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that yet, but it looks so good.
It is good, and it will make you appreciate the wheelman a lot more.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I already had some appreciation for him after watching Ronin, but okay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I do want to point out there's kind of a blurry line between your support character and other archetypes. The line between support and tank can be very blurry. The line between support and just control character can be very blurry.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's not a bad thing because that suggests some directions that you can take your character. Like, let's say you're playing a cleric right now and you feel like you're just playing Healbot 06. then you can say, okay, what other ways do I want to do support that is more interactive and more fun? Do you want to be cool frontline dude who just locks everyone down?
Free advice. If you're playing 5e, look at the spell Spirit Guardians. You're welcome.
That's a good one. Yeah. But, do you want to be the guy who specializes in winning the fight before anybody starts dealing damage? I played a wizard who was basically that. And this is not quite even support, but this was very much on the control end of things. But my whole goal was to never cast a spell that did damage and to win fights basically before anybody else had to start dealing damage. Things like the grease spell or mind control, where it's just like, we got this one guy, cool. He needs to make a save against dominate person. All right, well, we stopped that fight. That was easy.
Yeah, the old 3/5 Beguiler class was notorious for that.
Oh, that was nothing compared to what this guy was doing. Trust me.
I know you were a crazy optimizer, but yeah, that was one that just kind of had a rep for that. So
yeah, it's that level of, I'm going to win the fight before we've even done anything. Sure, the party rogue gets to go up and get their sneak attack, and that's cool, but I know that they wouldn't have had that without me. And that level of winning it before it starts, I think can be very satisfying, because it's like, okay, I've given us an enormous advantage. Now let's take advantage of that. So you don't rob people of those cool moments, you set them up for it, but you also, it's very clear that you have done that, which I think is very satisfying.
Yeah, which tends to make people very much appreciate your character too.
Yeah.
That's very much how I feel about playing Zarya in Overwatch. I rarely get play of the game, but I have on many occasions had people get play of the game from me using my ultimate at the right time.
Right. For those who don't know, Zarya's ultimate, a black hole that sucks everyone in the local area in and freezes them in place for a while.
Yeah. I want to say it's called Singularity, but I may be getting that confused with Mass Effect. But yeah, it's just very, very satisfying in a way to be like, I helped. I did that. I helped.
Well, and it combos so well with so many other skills.
It does. It does.
It doesn't do damage, but it turns out when all of your enemies are in one place and can't move in a first-person shooter, people who have AoE damage like that.
Mm-hmm. My favorite combo ever is shooting my ult, having Ana, a support character, buff like a Reinhardt or somebody who then charges in and just kills everybody in one hit. That's so satisfying because there's that synergy. And I think that's another thing that I really like about D&D 5e is that I feel like I can get a whole lot of synergy with the support characters regardless of what class I'm playing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And finding that group synergy is really, really key in amplifying your support characters.
Being part of the catalyst for that synergy is very satisfying if you're being intentional about it. Yeah. One last thing that we've got on here, and we actually touched on this a bit kind of in the Patreon question, Tim in particular, but the support role at the table outside of the game, I think, is probably worth discussing a little bit.
You guys also talked about it a fair amount, I think, in your hospitality episode as well, which I was not yet on the podcast for, but I greatly enjoyed. It was a very good episode.
Yeah, and maybe we just kind of want to refer back to that, because not everyone is necessarily, has as a spiritual gift listening to others and being kind of an impromptu counselor and that sort of thing. But if you are, that's something you should very much step up and do. And certainly, being a friend does not take a whole lot of experience.
Yeah.
And anything you can do to help other people at the table, to be hospitable to others, to support them, to make them successful as players rather than as characters is something we are called to do. Mm-hmm. Again, I'd say go back and listen to that particular episode, which I'll make sure to link in the show notes, because I think we did cover a lot of that there, but helping people out at the table is especially valuable.
Yes.
We talk about the GM needing to be, or how the GM should be the player's biggest fans. I think players also need to be each other's biggest fans, or fans of the story at the very least. And that is very much a supportive thing. We are all in this together.
I want to say fans of the other players at the table.
Okay, yeah.
Focusing too much on the narrative, I think sometimes can lead you to say, well, I don't care how you feel, the story should go this way.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's dangerous. Whereas being a fan of the people at the table will encourage them to help you create a good story together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that also brings about moments where Remember our group doing this where a couple of us were like, hey, this one person isn't getting a whole lot of spotlight time. What can we do about that?
Right.
And that was initiated by a couple of the players.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about, or not a lot, but we talked about the GM creating opportunities for the support character to shine. But actually, kind of as we're talking, and this goes back to what Jenny was talking about, that synergy. Actually, it's pretty much everybody's responsibility at the table to try to find a way to make everybody shine, right? It's really the collective, and that's really what should drive us to enjoy the game, I would hope, is the collective storytelling, building those moments that, you talk about years later. And because there's moments in games that I've been in that, we'll be sitting around talking, and it's like, hey, remember when that happened? That was really cool. And that's everybody's responsibility at the table, to try to give everybody there that opportunity to shine. That's what a healthy gaming group does, right? It's not filled with people who are there to try to make their own character shine and do everything, but they're there to tell a story collectively with one another and try to give opportunity for every person to have fun and to shine. And to have the spotlight from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's a great place to end this one, actually.
I think so, too.
All right. Well, Tim, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I had fun.
Good.
Excellent. Yeah, we are very glad we had you, because this was
very much.
There was a lot of very valuable thoughts that I want to go back and listen to as I edit. So I'm looking forward to that.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, all of you at home or in the car or at work or wherever you're doing your podcast listening, for continuing to listen to us. We really appreciate it. If you want to follow us on social media, facebook.com/savingthegame, twitter.com/savingthegame, et cetera, et cetera. And if you want to hear more of our episodes, we're on iTunes, Google Play, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, our website, stgcast.org, where there's also things like the blog post Peter does every other Tuesday when we're not releasing an episode, and various other things that Peter just writes and throws out there at random without telling anyone, just like, hey, here, I've got like 5,000 words, go.
Usually it's 2,000 or less. Let's be fair about that. One that I'll go ahead and reference specifically, I'd been running into a lot of posts about people like, hey, I've never GM'd before, but I want to. And I kept having to type out these lengthy responses. And finally I was like, I'm going to type this one more time. I'm going to make it the best I possibly can. I'm going to post it on the blog, and then I'm just going to link to it from now on. I may have to go through and, do another one in a couple of years when some of those things have changed. But for now, it's at least what I think is a really good collection of resources for a new or sometimes even experienced GM to use.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, from all of us here at Saving the Game, I think we'll wrap this one up here. Have a good one. Take it easy. We'll catch you next time.
See you later, folks.
Good night.
This has been a production of Saving the Game. All episodes are produced and published under a Creative Commons 4.0 Attribution Share-alike license. Our logo is by Ruben Smith Zempel of 3d6design.com. Our music is The Promised Place Beyond the Clouds by James Opie. You can find more of his music at nihilore.com. To hear our past episodes, to find syndication and license details, to connect with our fantastic listener community, or to contact us or support our show through Patreon, visit our website at stgcast.org or savingthegamepodcast.org. God bless, do good, and happy gaming.